The Strutfit Show, bringing retail into the future.
Hello and welcome to the Strutfit Show. I'm your host, Ang Nair. I'm also the CEO of Strutfit, where our vision is the same as the vision for this show, to bring retail into the future. Every episode, I'll be joined by a guest who is leading or innovating in some part of the retail spectrum, from design to manufacturing to marketing and even to sales. We'll discuss trends, learnings, and ideas, and really try to figure out what the top performers in your field are doing. Along the way, we'll discover some lessons you can apply to your own career and hopefully even have some fun. All right, let's do it. Hey, Jerome.
Hi.
Welcome to the Strutfit Show, where I think we were talking earlier, and you're like, well, why did we start this? And the reason I didn't mention was there's lots of cool things happening in like different verticals of the retail industry. And so you'll talk to someone in like digital, not even marketing, it's like digital content strategy, and they're doing some really cool stuff, but then someone over in sales will just have no idea about it.
Right.
Or someone who's managing a company at a high level thinks a certain way, and it would be useful for the people that they're managing to actually understand how someone at that level also thinks. And they just don't have that insight. So part of the other part of the reason of starting this was to break down those silos and actually share this information so people can just have a more holistic understanding of how retail works.
Okay, great. It's actually a very good initiative, and thank you again for having me today. This is exactly what retail is about. You know, it's trying to have a 360 degrees understanding of the business, because everything is interconnected. And so actually companies working in silos and people having this silo mindsets, they are not made for that business. You know? So that's a great initiative. Congratulations.
Awesome. Thank you. So I stumbled across you on LinkedIn. I can't remember if we were already connected, but then I saw your title, and I was like, well, this is very interesting. And I had a look at your history. I was like, whoa, this is such a cool kind of job and it's such a job not everybody would take, right? Like
absolutely. Thank you, Hang, for saying that, because absolutely not many people want to do that, because so you saw I spent most of my career on the international level, so China, Italy, the US, France. And yes, I'm jumping into companies when they are not doing well. And you're right that people don't want to do that, because many people, they want to have an easier ride, and they want to be in situations where things are flowing a little bit better.
Yeah.
Because usually when things are not flowing well, that also means the company has no cash. And when you have no cash, you know that the runway is shorter and shorter every day, you know. So yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of like a startup in that sense, where they describe a startup as you jump out of an airplane and you have to build a parachute on the way down.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it sounds a bit like that. At least you get adrenaline. How did you get into this? Like I saw earlier you started off as anyone does at like a low level, like a sales associate. And then I think you kind of got into marketing, and then all of a sudden you were doing all this operational stuff. So how did that journey, if you can cast your mind back?
Right. Well, I studied always business anyway. Back in the old days when I was a student, I always wanted to go abroad, and I wanted to go far from Europe back then. So that's how I started my career actually in China. And I was lucky enough, when I was there, I was looking for my, the last internship you're doing when you are finalizing your studies.
Yeah.
And so I came across some people who were actually building up a company called Cash Cash. It's a fast fashion brand for women. And they were starting from scratch in China, and they wanted people who were, motivated and wanted to experience an explosive growth. So I did a bit of trial with them. It worked out pretty well. And so, the great thing back then with China and this type of companies, that this is growing so fast and so much that you don't need to change company to change your job. Your job is evolving for you every day and every month, and of course you climb the ladder, and you had more skills every year to your portfolio. So that's how it happened. That's how I started to be in retail and in fashion, and actually how I actually started to have a foot into the turnaround industry and companies with difficulties, it was when actually when I left this first company in China, I started my own consulting business, and I started to be approached by Chinese companies which were in distress and which were experiencing a big change of the market in China. Because
and what time period was this?
This was around 2012. Yeah, okay. 2012. Yeah. And actually back then e-commerce was starting to boom a lot. So huge competitions for brick and mortar retail. You had a lot of international brands coming to China, and with a fast fashion business model, with a lot of IT.
Quite interesting. So international business were coming into China with fast fashion. Normally you think it's like the other way around, right?
Yeah, you would think that, but no, actually the industry in China was very traditional, and mostly, it all started in China. Usually you had manufacturer who started to open shops and put the products they were manufacturing to the shops, except that running a factory and running retail is very different. And so that's where those people, they were great at what they were doing. Huge quantities. You're talking about retailers like Semir. They were having like 10,000 stores in China. So it's huge. But, customers...
10,000 stores?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And the taste of customers was changing because of these new brands coming in. And so it was a whole reshuffle of the markets. And so that's why those Chinese companies started to want to work with foreigners who know how works the business model for these international brands in order to try to change a little bit the approach. So that's how I started to do that.
Cool. Yeah. And so you went from fast fashion, high growth, and you were there for, I think, 5 years?
Yeah, 5-6 years. Yeah.
Cool. And then post that, you had a consultancy, and then you also took up a longer term role, like a position came up and you're like, this is the company I'm going to turn around?
Yeah. So actually the company started to, some of my clients were very happy about what I did. And so one of them asked me to actually jump in back as an employee.
Okay. So before we jump into that.
Yeah.
So people come to you and they're like, hey, my business is not doing as well as it could. Or in fact, perhaps I'll choose to see reality and see that if it keeps going this way, it's not going to go well. And so they approach you. What are some of the areas? So if someone comes to you, they're like, hey, I need help. What sort of information do they give you? Or like, what sort of questions are you asking such that you can actually help their business?
Well, it depends. Are you talking about now or then?
Back then.
So back then I was having a shorter experience also. So I was more specialized about, how to run properly the store's operations, how to run properly operational marketing strategy, how to promote the brand so it becomes very desirable for the customers, And so it was more on that approach, and running the store in a different way, trying to make the stores very dynamic. That was the idea, because retail is traffic, brick and mortar retail is about having people coming in. And so that's the issue that those Chinese brands were facing. They saw that the traffic was actually decreasing for many reasons. And so that's why they approached me.
I see.
Yeah.
Cool. That makes sense. It makes sense that it's also that sort of smaller spectrum of things that you could look at for the whole business. And then as I guess you got more experience and the role changed.
Because I was then less experienced. Now I have a much broader experience. Cool. So I can touch all the parts of the organization, all departments. And so right now the questions would be very different. It would be actually as simple as, okay, how do you turn around my business? And so then that's why you need to go really in much more details, because you need to look at marketing, at retail, at your P&Ls, your cash, your buyings, your products, everything, so very, very different from now to then, or then to now.
Yeah, it's quite a journey. Okay. So one of the companies really like you and they're like, hey, can you come on as an employee?
Yeah, exactly.
Tell us about that.
Well, it was a shoe brand. It was called Stella Luna. So Stella Fashion Group was a big shoe manufacturer in China. One of the top 5 shoe manufacturer in the world, actually.
Oh, wow.
Huge.
How many shoes would they sort of manufacture? Like, how are they top 5 in terms of revenue, in terms of size?
In terms of size and revenues, they did 1.5 billion for a factory.
Wow. For a factory?
Yeah, for a factory.
Wow.
For not one factory, they had many plants, of course, but for manufacturing business, not bad, And actually they manufacture and still manufacture for a lot of luxury brands. And so they decided a few years ago to create their own retail business, their own brand. And so they grew very, very fast when the Chinese economy was very easy. This was before 2008. And opened many stores, hired a lot of people, but actually many stores were not profitable. So it was kind of a giant with a broken feet, with a broken leg.
Right.
And so they wanted to restructure, reorganize, clean the inventory also because they have a huge amount of inventory, reshuffle the retail business, change the business model, re-centralize everything, and try to make the business more healthy in order also to welcome a new investor. And so that's what I did. I stepped in, and with the CEO, we actually touched all the sides of the organization, products to retail to development of new stores, shutting down stores, hiring, firing people, and trying to really trim down the business to the essentials in order to make it looking better and more profitable.
Cool. And you mentioned re-centralization.
Yeah.
What does that look like?
So actually, when we stepped in, they were having 5 regions. So they basically took China, they cut it in 5 pieces. All right. And each piece was having one, let's say, a general manager. All right. And each GM actually recreated a small organization in his province, Okay. And so that means you had like 5 times product manager, 5 times visual merchandising, 5 times this and that, and
for the same product,
for the same organization. So basically, you multiply by 5 your organization.
Yeah.
And
but they were selling the same.
They were selling the same products, same brands.
Okay.
And so that means way too many people.
Yeah.
That's one thing. Second thing is that they had too much power and they were doing too much of what they wanted to. Except that when you start to have a significant amount of stores, you can actually consolidate the data. And when you consolidate the data, you are able to make stronger analysis. You are able to make better decisions. And you are, for example, we talk about the product life cycle. Okay. This is very important when you consolidate data. The more shops you have, the more data you have, the more accurate your life curve is going to be. And so you will be more precise about when you need to drop in the store some type of products. For example, you have like ankle boots. When do you start to drop ankle boots? Do you wait for November or do you start from August?
Right.
And so this type of thing, in order to have a better understanding of the business, also to remove some people who are not useful actually, and also to control better the network. Because when you do that, you remove some power from the regions. You refocus the person in charge of the region on its core business, which is more sales. All right. And all the back office management is more centralized.
Which just supports all the people doing sales everywhere else.
Exactly. Yeah. So all the logistics, IT, etc., is just in one headquarter and giving, a lot of services to all the regions.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's one way to see it. A lot of people would tell you the opposite. They would say, okay, it's better to give power to salespeople, to the shops. I don't think so. I think that data is really key. And I think also there's, fashion is a world of emotions. And sometimes people are forgetting it's also a world of numbers when you do retail,
Yeah.
And you don't want the emotions to take too much over the numbers.
When you say emotions, do you mean emotions from the customers when they're purchasing or emotions from people when they're like creating?
So I'm going to give you a very simple example. Let's say that you have a collection, all right? And you want to distribute this collection in all your stores. Okay. You have 200 stores. You can decide 2 ways. You can decide to look at the numbers of all the stores and say, okay, these stores, we're going to give it this assortment of products. This other store will have a different assortment. And you actually categorize your shops in maybe A, B, C, D. And you know that A, they have a type of assortment, B, another type, C, etc. Okay. That's one way to do it. The other way to do it is that you invite your shop managers to come over and you let them order the products.
Right. Yeah.
All right. I don't believe in that.
Okay.
I don't believe in that.
Wow. Because that's how a lot of, I guess I've seen brands do it more where they'll have like distributors in different markets. And And so, every 6 months, every year, you invite them over. You're like, hey, here's all our products.
And I think that if you invite the person in charge of the country, that works, because the person has the vision of the entire business. But when you talk about only one single store, that person doesn't know which product you want to push from a marketing standpoint, how much you committed in terms of inventory, how this product is contributing to the brand image or to the display in the stores, etc., etc. So of course you have to listen to your store people. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying we are not. You have to listen to their feedback. This is very important. But also you need to give clear directions, and you need also to be able to. You want to have consistency when you actually promote your brand. And the first way to get a good consistency for your brand is to have consistent retail. And so if you, let's say, we are in Paris right now. So we have the left bank and the right bank. You go on the right bank, you see one brand and it's looking amazing. And you go on the other bank and you see that very same brand, the shop is actually filthy. And just because the products are not the same at all, okay? What a shop experience you are having here. It's really bad. And also you have a bad point of view of that brand, So that's why, it's also very important for me that the centralization has a lot of positive effects. After, it doesn't mean that being centralized means that you are not flexible. You always want to keep about 20% of flexibility. And that's where, of course, you can give the chance to the shop manager, for example, to select some specific products. We're okay with that, But it's always a question of how much flexibility you want to give in your business model.
Yeah.
Do you give 80% flexibility and 20% of rules, or the opposite, all right? Me, I chose my side. I'm more like 80% of planning and 20% of flexibility,
That makes a lot of sense. I was on the consistency front. This is not it's kind of retail. It's food. I was at a restaurant with my friend, and he'd eaten there, and he ate again, and he's like, "Oh, this food's like pretty consistent." And then we were talking about McDonald's, and we were like, when you're traveling, I think I had KFC last time. I tried McDonald's here as well. Sometimes when you're traveling, you're like, "I'll just get McDonald's because I know what I'm going to get," and my friend Jordan was like, well, it's hard enough for a restaurant to be consistent from like week to week, let alone every restaurant in the world to be so consistent. And that's what makes, that's why you don't go to McDonald's for an amazing burger. You're like, I know what I'm going to get, and this is exactly what I want.
Exactly.
And regardless of where I am in the world.
There's no surprise.
Yeah.
And people don't often like too much surprise, especially when they are bad surprises.
Especially when they're bad surprises. And but they even have that, I guess, like flexibility, because here you get different. I forget what it was, but you'll get like regional changes as well.
Exactly, the menu are not the same. The cheese is not the same. For example, it's in some countries you will have more chicken, some others you will have more beef. It really depends of where you are. Yeah.
Okay. Now I have a more philosophical sort of zoom out question. Often when like companies fail or countries fail, you look at them and you're like, well, you could have seen that coming. How did you not see it coming? How does a company get to a stage where it's like, all right, we need to turn something around? So yeah, firstly, how does that occur? And then maybe we can talk about some signs that if you're in a company now that you could like spot. Some of it will be just like people not wanting to, or maybe a lot of it will people not be wanting to see like reality and come to terms with reality. But yeah, just that's a big question. Tackle whatever part you want.
It's a spot on question, actually. Thank you for asking it, because it's that's where this question has many answers. First of all, the mission of a company, what is it? It's actually to be profitable, right? Because if the company is not able to be profitable, it's not going to survive. And that's the number one priority for a company, make money. And so that means when it makes money, that means the EBITDA, it's a standard ratio in finance, is a positive EBITDA. That means...
what is it? I know what it stands for, but for people listening, they might not.
So it's earning before interest, taxes, and depreciation and amortization. And actually, it's a ratio that says one very simple thing. Is my business model able to make cash or actually consuming cash? Negative EBITDA, that means that the company is not profitable and actually consuming cash. If it's a positive EBITDA, that means the company is actually making cash. As simple as that. We're simplifying everything, but that's the idea here. And so that's the number one mission here. And so when a company starts to have a negative EBITDA, it consumes cash. And so that if the company has cash reserve on the bank accounts, it goes down and down and down from time to time. And at some point, the company has no cash, so it needs new investors or the company is going to close, right? So that's the first indicator. But that's not the only one. You know, how come you ask a question when you say, how come that people don't see it coming? Actually, very often people don't see it coming because it's, after all, a company, it's made of humans. All right. And so you have a CEO, you have management team, but also you have employees. I think we always talk about the management team, but it's also very important to talk about the employees. And among all of these people, some of them are living in denial. Some people also have different interests than the company. People, sometimes they just come in the company to make some money for themselves, and that's it. They don't really care about what's going to be the future of the company. I'm going to give you one example. I saw a study, it was a few months ago. It was the Institute Gallup, which is an international institute of research for.
I saw this. I saw you share it, and I was like, "What are these stats?" But
it's crazy, isn't it? Yeah. So do you want to share it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so this institute actually was made a study from different countries to see the motivation of people across the globe within an organization as employee. And so if you look in the US, for example, the percentage of employees who are motivated, it was about 35%, if I remember right. And if you compare to France is about 4%. 4% of motivated people. So it's I'm not here to make a judgment on that about why, because there's many taxes or whatsoever. It's just that it is what it is. You have out of 100 person on a plateau in an office, you have 4 who are going to be really motivated. And the worst of that, the study said that you have within the 96% left, you have 7% which are made of people who are actually in the company to make damages to the company. It's crazy. And so that shows you that people have different interests. And so that's why you have to be very vigilant about which people you have, how long they've been in a company, are they obsolete or not, what is their capacity or not to make the company step into the future, you know, and this is extremely important as well. And you can see when you step into an organization, you go to the office, you see people's, you feel the atmosphere is like people are sleepy. You don't feel the energy. When you start to speak with people, you can see that the mindset is back 40 years ago. You know, you're like, oh, this is a red flag, and you know that the company isn't gonna live long. The other thing also is when now we go back to a more like quantitative indicator is we talk about EBITDA, we talked about the cash level, of course. We can talk about the inventory. When your inventory level is increasing, that's a bad news, because that means you are not able to sell your products. And so for many reasons, maybe the collections is not how to say liked by the customers. Maybe you bought too much inventory. Probably your sales target by your sales team were put way too high.
Yeah.
Okay. Or maybe the CEO is too stubborn to put more accurate sales targets. Yeah. He really believes he's gonna make it, but he's not gonna make it.
And so the problem there is that every season you're purchasing, call it 100,000 units, and those cost money, obviously, to purchase.
Absolutely.
And you're like, cool, I expect to sell. I'm being optimistic. I expect to sell, 90,000, or maybe you expect to sell. It depends if you want to sell out. Maybe you expect to sell 120,000. So you're like, I'll order 100,000, and then you sell out. It's not a problem,
right?
But if you're only selling 120,000, and you order 200,000, then that's a problem, because you're left with inventory at the end of the season.
Exactly, and inventory is cash.
Yeah,
because technically you had to pay for the workers who actually manufacture the products. And so this is actually cash that you put in the fridge, and you are waiting for the products to go bad, That's why it's really bad. Because also the problem is that the longer you have these products in your stock, the more chances, the chances of selling it at a low price, at a discounted price, is increasing. You know, and obviously you don't want that.
Talk me through some of the economics of a shoe. So if a shoe costs, if a shoe, it'll be different for different industries. Probably a luxury shoe doesn't cost that much more to create. But say like a typical 150 euro sneaker, how much would that cost to like manufacture? And then, how much would it cost to manufacture? And then at the end of the season, if they're selling it down for like 50% off, are they still making money, or at that point, are they just trying to recoup?
It's a tricky question when you talk about sneakers, because sneakers is the most profitable business. Actually.
Okay, let's choose a different one.
because sneakers actually it's quite easy to make. You know, so you can you use mold to do the sole, very easy, and the assembly line are very simple. It's more complicated to make like regular boots or regular shoes like you can find in many brands, like the one I have here. It takes a lot of hours, to make a shoe like this. It takes more than 2 hours of manufacturing to do a shoe like this.
Versus how long for a sneaker?
A sneakers, it's a third of the time of that.
A third?
A third, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's very easy to do. And also because you have less steps, the material is also cheaper. And so, it's all about man-hour cost. The more man-hour cost you're going to use, the more expensive is going to be the product. And the shoe industry is actually, and I'm talking about France, I'm not talking about other countries, even though I've seen things in East Europe or North Africa, it's still a very old-fashioned industry. It's very manual. Things are handmade.
Interesting.
So
that's in my mind, and I feel like people of my generation's mind, everything in factories is just made by robots. We're just like, you just have an assembly line, and that's just not the case.
The more automatized, the most automation you can find in a factory for shoes is going to be for sneakers.
Okay.
That's why they're cheap. And that's why they are able to make like a crazy margin on that. When you see those luxury brands, I'm not going to give name, but some of them, they had these famous sneakers, which were basically a sole with a knit upper on it.
Oh yeah, I feel like I know.
Yeah, I think you know exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah. And they were black and white mostly.
Yeah.
And
then everybody copied them.
And this, what was the retail price? It was maybe
it's like 1,000 or something.
Well, it was 1,000 or something. Yeah. And I think the manufacturing cost was maybe 50.
Wow. Okay.
That's it.
That's good markup.
It's a really good markup. Yeah, exactly. And actually, surprisingly, the markup is less good on shoes like that. It all depends of the brand, of the power of the brand, because obviously you are when your name is Hermes, you can multiply by 20 the cost of your shoes to have your markup margin. That's very easy. When you have a less famous brand, you can do times 5. That's it. That's not a lot. But back to your question, it's technically the most consuming part for making a shoes. You have 5 steps to make a shoes. You technically, the most consuming steps are the one to make the uppers, because you need to cut the leather, you need to stitch together the leather, you need to give him the shape. This is really, really time consuming.
Okay.
And so that's where you need to be really strong at selecting the country where you're going to manufacture your upper. Because you want to have a man-hour cost, which is cheaper.
Okay.
Obviously, when you try to do upper in France, it's really, really hard, because the man-hour cost is so expensive that quickly your shoe cost is going to the roof.
How much more expensive is the manufacturing cost?
It can be from double to triple.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes a big difference.
It's absolutely. It's not the same country. There's a lot of protections in France. There is the medical insurance, there is retirement, there is all of this. So someone needs to pay for that, and in the end, the person who's paying for it is the customer.
Could you elaborate on that? How do you mean?
Yeah, because your man-hour cost is actually very high, because on the salaries,
right,
you need to deduct on each paycheck. You have a contribution for the medical insurance, contribution for retirement, contribution
and that just goes automatically through the paycheck.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's why your cost is really high.
Cool. Okay, that makes sense.
Not cool, but yeah.
Not cool. Well, hopefully some people get to retirement and have some retirement now when maybe they wouldn't have otherwise.
We'll see. I don't know. You know, the economy is I think it's a bit. We're living a strange time right now all over the world.
Yeah.
So I think that nobody has a crystal ball and can tell what the future is going to be. Right?
That's true. Have you seen the movie The Big Short?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I watched it again like 2 weeks ago.
Such a good movie.
I was like, these guys are just like gambling with people's retirements,
right?
Which, as you would expect your retirement to be safe, right? You're like, cool. It's just, in fact, you're just like, oh yeah, my retirement's with this trusted institution. House of cards, man.
And it continues because this is called option trading, and option trading, it's a fascinating world, but it's something that is happening every day, every second, with millions of guys who are still gambling, like you said.
Yeah. Well, we mentioned economy. How is the economy affecting the footwear retail space, or even just retail space at the moment? Because like we were talking to vendors, we've been in market now 4.5 years, and we started in 2019, and then 1 year later COVID happened, which was, we thought would be good for us because we were like, oh, more people people are closing their stores, so people have to shop online.
Right.
And online, the main problem still is, is it going to fit me? What does it feel like? And we're like, oh, we can solve the fit question, so vendors will want our solution. And that's what we thought would happen. And well, actually, we planned for the worst case, so we raised money just in case it didn't work out, and so we'd be able to last the period. But then what happened was retailers were just shutting up shop. They were like, oh, well, physical stores still make up a lot of our revenue, and we can't get that revenue coming through. And even though the tool would help online, they're like, we can't spend any more money right now because it's so uncertain.
Right.
So everyone was sort of tightening up budgets as opposed to investing on e-commerce, even though all the stats for e-commerce adoption like doubled. They've come down a bit since. But yeah, that was sort of 2 years ago. Now, I guess the talk is of inflation, right? Like people's manufacturing costs are going up, and
absolutely.
Talk to us about that.
But not only, actually. So obviously, manufacturing costs, energy costs are going to the roof.
Energy costs.
Yes, absolutely. Electricity, as an example. It's really expensive right now. When you look at gas, for example, also very, very expensive.
Yeah.
So all of this is really not helping companies to survive. But when it's not only about the inflation, it's also about the retail environment itself. We can take the example of France right now. There's a lot of bankruptcies happening. So we talked earlier. I told you that not all my project worked, and the most recent one I have, actually, we are not able to turn around the company, and actually you have many companies being shut down right now in France. And for the past 12 months, that's a lot of fashion companies actually have closed.
Wow.
I think that the retail landscape is changing a lot. So you have more competition also online. I think because of the purchasing power being more limited because of inflation, people maybe sometimes they go more to buy products which are a little bit cheaper. There's also, the rise of the second-hand market,
Right.
This is actually very strong right now because the new generation, they are buying products, resell, rebuying like this, So that's really changing the approach to buying fashion. And also, when you look at some cities like Paris, for example, you had some streets before where you had a huge traffic, and right now it's dead.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. We can talk about Rue du Faubourg Saint-Honoré, the very famous street for luxury shopping back then, where you have Hermes, when you have Prada, when you have all of these brands. And right now the street is really dead. There's just people going for Hermes. You have a queue in front of Hermes, and that's pretty it. You know what I mean? And so this is also, you need some adaptations as well.
Yeah.
I also think that, some brands have a life cycle as well.
Have a what goal?
A life cycle, sorry.
Oh yeah, life cycle.
And so it's pretty, some of them have difficulties to renew that life cycle simply, I think also some brands simply, they don't have a reason to exist anymore, unfortunately. Some have, they need investment. The whole question is, how do you reinvent the brand, knowing also that you have more and more concentration of those big fashion groups. If you talk about luxury, for example, right now you have LVMH, you have Mehula, you have Kering, there is Richemont, maybe one or two, but technically you have 5 or 6 huge players in luxury, right? So let's say that you try to create a luxury brand.
Actually, for the people listening, I didn't realize this, but like when you like Balenciaga, Gucci, they're all owned by the same houses. Yeah.
And so when you are buying, you know, an old sleepy luxury brand, trying to relaunch it, how do you do it? Because you don't want to play a stupid game. The stupid game meaning like, okay, I'm going to spend millions in advertising. I'm going to spend millions in marketing. It's right. You can't. You don't have that cash because no VCs is going to give you that much money. So how do you compete in front of those elephants in the room, you know, who are so powerful that you can't anyway compete on the same level? And so you need to find new ways to run with cheaper operation, but also smart ways to appear on the market differently. You know, and some brands are able to do it. Huh? You know, there's not in luxury, but I have in mind, for example, Cézanne. Cézanne, it's a French company. They launched a few years ago now. They started by having they were selling only online and just having one showroom where you can try the products, and it works really well, you know. So there's new business model which are actually rising.
And that works because you don't have massive store costs, right? You're not
exactly. That's the thing. Also, you if we can take the example of some menswear brands in France, which were having a huge footprint in retail. And actually they were having shops in 2nd and 3rd tier cities, but also in Paris. And actually their business is doing well only in 2nd and 3rd tier cities.
Okay.
But in Paris, it's just like, you know, burning cash. So why keeping those stores, you know?
Yeah.
When I worked for this brand Cash that we mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, the smart thing we did with Cash in China back then was to not try to open stores where there is competition. That means the head office was in Shanghai. We decided not to open in the center of Shanghai. What we did, the first shop we opened was actually in the 5th ring of Shanghai. It was actually another district. It was another city called Putuo. And it was in a very commercial street. There was no competition. And that store back then was having the best sales revenue per square meter ratio of the group worldwide.
Wow.
You know, and so this type of things, you know, it's a way to not play what I called earlier the stupid game. You try to find different ways to reach your audience, to try to keep your costs low, because nowadays we know also that there's no big investors going to come and give you $1 billion check and say, okay, please have fun with the brand. That doesn't work. You know? Usually you work with VCs. VCs, they are very aggressive. They give you a bit of money. And so how do you make the best of that money? And then that comes down to the CEO. Is the CEO having this mindset of being conscious that he's not anymore in those big groups, for example, or and understanding that he's not an entrepreneur and he needs to find out of the box ways to work on the business.
Would they keep the same CEO or bring in a new one?
Well, usually the VCs, they bring a new one.
Yeah.
They bring a new CEO because anyway, they are, you know, it's an acquisition. So they buy part or entirely the company with its debts or not, depends. And they bring a new CEO. But, you know, bringing a new CEO doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a success, you know. I really think now, after so many years working in turnaround, there's 2 types of CEOs. And I'm going to say it in the most simple way. It's going to sound very logical, but it's not. You have the CEOs coming from those big companies who never had to deal a second with huge money problems. All right. And you have those guys who have actually always be facing money problems. This is a very different mindset, because when you don't have to worry of how you're going to pay your employees, etc., You pay. It's okay. It's no problem, and you just do the strategy that you learn in those big groups, and you don't have to question yourself, etc. Right? When you had to deal with money problems, well, you are going to try to not spend that money, and you are going to be more resilient. You are not going to be so much touched by stress and pressure, etc. And I think that in those turnaround cases, the mistake that I've seen very often until recently actually is that putting a CEO who never had to deal with money and who is just like doing exactly what he learned in those big groups before and not facing the reality.
Yeah, interesting. My friend also talks about salespeople being like this. So he's hired many salespeople at his marketing tech company. And he's like, when you would hire, you get someone's CV and they're like, oh, Salesforce for 5 years, and he's like, those people never work out well because they haven't actually had to sell. People would just come to them because they know the product and they're like, hey, can I buy this thing? And they would just facilitate the deal. They weren't actually having to go out, sort of build the brand, build connections, and actually sell. And it's an entirely different kind of person and CEO.
Exactly. It needs very different skills. And also it's, we talked about the experience, the one who had to deal with money or not, but also I think it's a personality thing. And some guys are just not geared to do that. That's it. They are probably amazing CEOs when everything's okay and there is money, but when it's a mess, they're just not. They're just not the right person for it.
It's like the wartime and peacetime CEO.
Yeah, exactly. And it's actually funny that you mentioned the sales team, because I really think that also that sales teams can be extremely dangerous, because if you have this person you describe in your team who is going to put you like really high sales target and tell you, yeah, don't worry, I'm gonna do it. Okay. The danger of this is that you risk to buy too much inventory to be able to achieve the target. And so that can really put the company into danger. And that's also why, when you pick your sales team, you have to really, like you said, look at the background, what they really did, and also to see how much realistic they are.
Yeah.
To avoid to over promise, it's better to promise less and deliver more. Than over promise and not deliver at all, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Especially in this economy, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
Previously, it was like growth for growth's sake. Just keep growing, do what you can, and now people are like, we should do something about these return rates.
Exactly. Yeah.
Interesting. The Chinese market is so opaque. I feel like outside looking in, like I know not a lot about, like the fact that you said there was 10,000 stores for that company. Was that just in China or just around the world?
Just in China.
That's like insane scale. How, like I've seen brands now try go, like Wittard, for example. I have a friend doing that in Hong Kong, where they have tea and they're like, cool, we want to go into this market. And he was telling me about these, back in the day, you'd have like infomercials and people would have like a product and be like, hey, tell you about this product, and then ring up and dial and buy this sort of tally shopping. That apparently is a thing again in China.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it's like massive.
It is massive, yeah, absolutely. It's to me, I'm like, I'm astonished about it, because to me it sounds so much like something coming from the 80s. But it works. It works because it's done their way. It's really adapted to the culture, I think. So I don't really know what to say. I'm surprised. I'm as surprised as you are.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. But China it's a fast changing market. So right now it might be working, but maybe in 2 years from now it's gonna be over. Because the pace of this market is so strong, so amazing, that things change really fast. And something that was trendy 2 years ago is not anymore right now. And that's the difficulty of the market. It's how do you have brands and how do you keep a consistent strategy on a market like this?
When it keeps changing. True.
Exactly.
Especially if you're not from there.
especially if you're not from there, and especially because you asked me before the conversation also, it's what type of company should get into the market, and it's more and more clear to me a company that is ready to invest. Many people, so many brands, many companies or CEOs back then, they were like, okay, we're going to go to China. We're not going to invest much. It's going to be fine. And that doesn't work, because now Chinese customers are really well educated about fashion, for example, and other products actually. And they know the prices, they know the quality. They also have that, a lot of, there's a new generation of designers coming in. And so if you want to make your brand desirable, you need to put money on the table to make it desirable, because you want to advertise, you want to open the shops in the right place. Back then also many brands were using distributors to do that, but many of those distributors right now, they're in difficulty as well. So concentration happened. So you have some big players, and then you have some small ones, but they change every 3 years, because they come, they collapse, they come, they collapse. And that's the difficulty of the market. So if you go there, you need to be ready to invest.
Yeah, and not see returns, I guess, immediately.
And not see returns immediately. No, exactly. And also you need to be able to approach the market in again, to act local. The famous localization, because you can't, for example, I have in mind about shop construction. Many brands back then were actually sending the materials for building a store from their country, from Italy, from the US or whatsoever, to China in order to build a store, which is stupid because the materials were actually coming from China. So so the materials were traveling from China to the US and back from the US to China, and this is so inefficient and it's not cost effective, and see, this is one example among many. Now, this has changed right now. Many brands are not doing that anymore. They are all, sourcing the materials in China and building from there. But back then it was not the case. It was not necessary. When you were sourcing the materials directly in China, you were like so innovative. It was not innovative. It was just being, having common sense.
Yeah.
But it was not that common.
Common sense do be like that. You mentioned earlier resilience. How do you cultivate resilience, like within yourself? Because you've obviously been in some very challenging roles. And I've had, I would guess, more difficult conversations than most people have in a lifetime.
Right.
So how did you build that resilience, and how do you sort of maintain it?
I think there is, first of all, a personality thing. I'm lucky enough to come from a family. I come from a very normal family. My dad was a salesman in a store, and my mom was working in administration. So, nothing crazy. And actually, life happens in the way that my dad had many accidents, etc. And so my parents were resilient. And I think that they teach you that without teaching it to you. They are, by showing they are resilient, they teach you that. That's the number one thing. Number two is when there's problems, they taught us to face the problems. So it comes from the education. I think also personality is very important. And also after this, it's, your mindset. How do you like to be in an easy situation, or do you like to face challenges? I like intellectual difficulty. I liked having difficult conversation. It's not a problem for me. And after, there's also a life hygiene, I would say, I'm working out every day, minimum once a day.
Minimum once a day,
every day.
I thought I was working out heaps. I got to work out more.
And every day of the week. I never break. I try to eat healthy. I try, so I try to read as many books as I can. So I really try to motivate the brain and also to get perspective, because like you said earlier, when you are having difficult conversation, you could doubt sometimes, especially because people can be, especially people who are ignorant and people who are knowing the least, they are the one who can be vocal. And the people who are smart, they're the one who don't speak. And those people can come with lies, with wrong analysis and speak out loud to the world. And all of this is bullshit. And this is hard, because I really hate lies. And this is hard to handle. And so that's why also, reading books, meeting other people helps you also to have more perspective on the situation. And so to realize that, okay, my point of view is right. And unfortunately the situation is bad, but we need to carry on, Yeah.
Excellent.
You are at some point, sometimes situations are so complicated that you don't have a choice, because when you're in a situation where the CEO start to be coming and cry in your arms because he's not able to handle the pressure, if he doesn't, then who's gonna do it? You have to do it, right? So that's the thing, that's you don't have the choice. You are in a train to hell and the train is not gonna stop. And so you have to decide until when you are going to assume the responsibility or not. And sometimes the train actually is able to go back to heaven. And that's where it's very rewarding. It's not always, I'm not saying that it's always a success. Sometimes it's failures. But that's part of the game. That's part of the, I don't, there's this very famous guy in France who said something very interesting, because he created a company called Mythic. I don't know if it was a dating app, dating company. He made millions with that. And he says, there's, let me think about the French first. And he was saying, because he was being criticized for some of this business which didn't work, etc. after this, and he said something very right. He said, there's only people who never did anything who never did a mistake. Only the one who never did anything in their life, that means who never tried to do something, those ones, they are the only ones who never did a mistake. And this is very true. If you try, sometimes you do mistakes. That's okay. But also when you try, you succeed as well.
You have to be willing to make those mistakes.
Exactly.
Otherwise, you don't move.
Exactly. And it can be very cultural, because some cultures are not accepting mistakes. Some cultures are, if we talk about the American culture, they actually are welcoming mistakes, because like Churchill said, Churchill? Churchill was saying that you either win, either learn. You never lose, actually. And this is very true. And Americans are very much like that. In France, it's very different. France is very much about, you did a mistake, you lose, you're a loser, you're useless, etc. The mindset is absolutely the opposite, And so and this is very interesting. I don't know in New Zealand, how is it in New Zealand?
In New Zealand, we have this thing called the tall poppy syndrome, which is not to do with failure, it's more to do with success, where people will, if you're a newcomer, say you're a comedian, I know a comedian who faces this, or Israel Adesanya, UFC?
Yeah.
So when you're coming up, although he's still widely liked, but yeah, when you're coming up, people want to support you because you're not that successful yet, and we like cheering for the underdog. Then when you get to a certain level of success, then everyone just turns against you and then cuts you down. And so it's called a tall poppy syndrome, where if you imagine a field of poppies, the taller poppies, which are more successful, get cut down. So everyone's at this like lower level.
Oh, wow.
So that's the main problem. Also, though, when people fail, I've seen the media portray those failures in like the worst light possible. They're just like, you can always look at something with like different perspectives, right? And so they look at it in the worst perspective, and that's definitely not good. It makes people want to not try, right?
This is actually very accurate. And if you allow me, I would like to elaborate on this when you talk about media, because my experience with that is also that the many journalists are actually less and less professional, and they are just trying to get one side of the picture. They're not trying to get the entire picture, and they just want to have a one-sided article or preview because they know it's going to sell,
Yeah.
And this is just like ridiculous. It's actually very pathetic, right?
Yeah, for sure. Like if anyone's still consuming the news stop. News is like, it's entertainment, but it's the worst kind of entertainment, because they're like, there's this war happening in this country which has nothing to do with you, but you should feel bad about it. Or like, here's another climate disaster, and you're like, I just want to have my dinner. Or, they're painting some company in a bad light because precisely at the end of the day, the news is still a business. You said, what's the main purpose of a business?
Exactly.
It's first, you got to be actually on that. It's like, what you said was the main purpose of a business is to be profitable. Mm-hmm. What people might take that as, and they shouldn't, is it's not to be the most profitable as possible, right? Mm-hmm. Because you can do that and do it in ways which aren't beneficial to the environment or the world.
Right, absolutely. You're absolutely right to try to be more precise about what profitable means, because also I can imagine that some people would be like, oh yeah, to be profitable, to give money to shareholders. Yes, also, but before giving money to shareholders, that means that when the company is able to give money to shareholders, that means the company was able to pay its bill, its suppliers, its employees. Mm-hmm. So to feed an entire ecosystem, and then it will pay shareholders. And it's normal, because shareholders are people who are actually putting money that they earn from their own work in a business and trying to take risk, and that people have to really understand that, for example, when you are putting money in a company which fails, you lose your money. I lost some money in some ventures, obviously, and I made money in others. And again, that's the thing. And so that's why, the word profitable, it's really important to understand what it means. It means like a company able to survive, feed an ecosystem, pays its employees, and then potentially pays some shareholders.
Yeah, the employees thing is, now we have employees, and a lot of them have mortgages, and so like, that's, you're paying the employees. It becomes a lot more real when suddenly your employees have lives, or they have children. Exactly. And you're like, okay, well, this is
you feel the responsibility, right? But also yes, you definitely are responsible of these employees, but you are not also daddy and mommy. All right. I think that people are free men, free women, and if they are not happy, they can choose to go somewhere else. Back to what we did, the statistics we talked about earlier. If you're not happy, just leave. Stop to pollute a company. Just go somewhere else. But people will tell you, but I can't because I don't know if I will find a job, etc. So do everything to get a new job then. Well, some of your listeners are going to be very upset with what I just said, but that's okay.
No, I mean, if they're upset, it's like there's a quote where it's like, those who are offended most easily should be offended more often, or something like that. Where it's like, if you're hearing that statement and it's triggering something in you, then you should probably listen to that trigger and be like, oh, actually, maybe I'm not happy in my job, right? Maybe
exactly.
Like people, I share this quite a lot on my like personal Instagram and other podcasts, where I'm like, you're gonna die. Like eventually, you will die. Maybe you get to come back to life and samsara, but this version of you will die. Like, you should try and make the most of the life that you have. And if you're in a job you don't enjoy, and you might be like very unmotivated, and maybe you find, actually you might be anti-motivated, where you're trying to bring the company down, and maybe you find some purpose in that. And then there's like people who are like straight up unmotivated. It's like, if you can get to if you can work somewhere, you don't even have to start something. If you can just work somewhere where you enjoy, first of all, just enjoy the people you work with. Next, then enjoy the work that you're doing. Your life will just be a lot more fun to live.
Precisely. Plus, so you are an entrepreneur, so you know how much of a roller coaster it is. Mm-hmm. Because funding, you mentioned you have employees now, so you have pressure to pay also salaries. How do you pay the salaries at the end of the month, etc.? But this is very addictive as well. Mm-hmm. And I really push people to, if they have an idea, just to try. If you fail, it's okay. It doesn't matter. Failing is a way to learn, like Churchill was saying once again. So I fully agree with you. Finding fulfillment and happiness is actually very important. And not being a slave of your work for 40 years is very important, also because we live in a world where I think that committing, especially as an employee for so long, it's actually lying to yourself. If you are saying to yourself, okay, I'm going to do for 40 years a career as an employee in this company, you lie to yourself because the company has many chances not to exist 10 years later. And that's also putting the responsibility of your life choices on the company. That's your choices. You have to assume it, but people don't understand that. And that's where we go back to, the de-responsibilization of people, where they put back the responsibility on the company or others.
Yeah.
It's not my fault. It's someone else's fault. It's always like that,
Yeah. Interesting. And even just making a decision for that long, like I haven't bought a house yet and I don't have a mortgage because I'm like, if you get a mortgage, I mean, I'll probably do okay but if I had like a normal salary job, you're going to have that mortgage for 20 years. I'm like, I don't know if I can make a decision for 40-year-old version of me or 50-year-old version of me. And so if someone's entering a company, be like, I'm going to be here for 40 years. It's like, you don't know.
Exactly.
You don't know how you're going to feel tomorrow. 40 years from now.
Exactly. And like you said, the tomorrow right now, it's like, what is it going to be? It's nobody knows.
Yeah.
What you said earlier, you said that companies, they were telling you that they may be cut on budgets and they try to see what's going to happen. I really like there's a quote in Latin. In Latin, it says, "In dubio pro malo." That means in doubt, get ready for the worst. And actually, I think many companies are doing that right now as well, because I think everybody is waiting for the real estate bubble to explode. They are waiting for the stock market to crash. They are waiting for all of that. But that's understandable. You want to get ready for the worst just in case.
Yeah. And so if you had a recommendation for, I guess, brands which are feeling the squeeze, perhaps they've got too much inventory because they bought it based off last year and it's not last year anymore. Or they can just feel things are kind of slowing down. Would that be your advice? What would your advice be to them?
My advice would be, if they are in this very specific situation, it's they have to act very fast. Speed is actually one criteria that many people advertise, but they don't apply to their business. And especially when you're in a turnaround business, you need in the first 2 months to make all the hard decision, all the hard communication, and you need to cut wherever you can, and you need to clean inventory however you can, right? And you need to go really, really, really fast. That's the key. That's the only one key, to act now. Even if it's going to be difficult because you might have bad press, you might have people unhappy, etc. But this is for the survival of the company. So that's more my advice, to be extremely responsive and stop to wait.
Yeah.
It's urgent to stop waiting and to act.
Yeah. And if that's just great advice. And like, if it's like the speed of action. And what I would add to that is like the speed of acknowledgement, where they're like, maybe I'll take it out of the company and to like say you're in a relationship and you're like, oh, this is not quite right. It's not quite hitting in the same right direction. And like, you're like, oh, I can make it work. Or something comes up, like an idea just comes up in your head and you're like, don't worry about it, brain. It's fine. And then tomorrow it sort of comes up again and you're like, it's okay. Don't worry about it. We'll make it work. But recognizing when that thought sort of arises in your brain and like giving it due process and being like, actually, maybe there is a problem here, and then you can't act on the problem if you don't recognize it first.
Absolutely.
And so it's like that speed of recognition of like seeing
speed of recognition, speed of action. And also I like this example of a relationship, and we're going to go back to your example of the house. Let's say you are in a bad relationship and you're like, okay, I'm not so happy, but let's buy a house and we're going to move in together and it's going to be great. Would you do that? No. And people do, actually.
People do that.
People do that. Yeah, you're right. I would not. My point here is that back to the speed of action, it's also speed of the idea is to dimension properly your business based on what you on the actual situation. The mistake I have seen also is you have these guys who are dimensioning the business based on perspective. So for example, you have this CEO, he takes over this brand and he's like, okay, my target is to do $1 billion of sales, annual sales. So I'm going to recruit the teams to do 1 billion sales. This is a mistake because you're not going to get the 1 billion sales at the speed you want and not that quick consequently. So you'd rather just like on the opposite, redimension your team down because you know that the pace to get there is going to be a lot slower. And actually, when you have to deal with growth problem, that's a good problem to deal with. So it doesn't matter. But when you have to deal with downsizing problem when you are running out of cash, that's a shitty problem.
That's true. That's so true. I haven't heard it put it that way before. Like I've always thought, you want to cap your downsides. Often startups do this. They'll like raise a lot of money, hire a lot of people, and then just burn out. Whereas we've kept it very lean. We have a very small amount of staff. We've raised not that much money, and so we've kept majority of like a lot of the company. And yeah, now we can afford to like go and not make like rash decisions because you don't have to. We're like, I'm here for 20 years. It's all good. And like, we don't have to rush to
exactly
make decisions.
to save costs. When you talk about earlier that a startup is about jumping out of the plane and building a parachute, I would say that for any companies, the plane is on the ground, and the more cash you have, the longer is the runway, and the more chances you have to take off.
Oh, wow. I like that. Is that why they use runway? Because always they talk about runway. I guess that must be why they say the word runway.
I don't know, but that's the way I say it.
We've invented it. That's epic. Cool, man. We've been talking for over an hour, which is surprising because that time has flown by.
Okay. All right.
But yeah, that's kind of everything I had that I wanted to talk about. But is there anything else that you want to cover?
No, I just hope that your listeners and you are really happy about this. And if there's some questions, I'd be happy to do round 2. No problem.
Awesome. Sounds good. Well, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you very much, Ang.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of The StrutFit Show. I've been your host, Ang Nair. And if you enjoyed it, if you found some parts where you were like, this has added some value to my life, then please share it with a few other people that you think would also value this information or that snippet. And when they like it as much as you did, I'm sure they'll thank you. If you're interested in what we're doing at StrutFit, head to our website at www.strut.fit to learn more and get in touch with us. If you want to get in contact with me directly, you can reach me at ang@strut.fit. All right, that's all, folks. Till next time, take care.